Zora Fali was a boxer who dominated the heavyweight division for a time during the middle of the 20th century. He rose from humble beginnings to become a heavyweight boxing contender and even challenged the legendary Muhammad Ali for the world title. Outside the ring, Foley was a Korean War veteran, a respected family man, and a civic leader in Chandler, Arizona. Yet in July 1972, this accomplished life met a mysterious end. Foley died under suspicious circumstances at a motel swimming pool, an officially quote-unquote accidental death that many have questioned ever since. Turning professional in 1953, the 6'1" fighter racked up an impressive record of 79 wins, 11 losses, and 6 draws over 17 years. He climbed into the ring with many of the era's best, claiming victories over contenders like Eddie McKen, George Chuvalo, Oscar Bonavena, and many others. In October 1958, for example, Foley traveled to London to face British champion Henry Cooper in a high-profile bout. Though Foley was favored, Cooper pulled off an upset points victory, handing Foley a rare defeat on his otherwise stellar record. Undeterred, Foley continued to be a top-ranked contender for years, his consistent performance keeping him in the Ring magazine's top 10 heavyweight list for over a decade. Foley developed a reputation as a skilled, tactical boxer and a true gentleman of the sport. He neither smoked nor drank, and was known for his clean living and sportsmanship. Unlike many brash fighters, Foley was soft-spoken and courteous. This dignified demeanor made him a role model in his hometown of Chandler. Even as he fought heavyweight titans like Sonny Liston, who knocked him out in 1960, Foley remained steadfast and humble. By the mid-1960s, he was widely regarded as one of the best heavyweights never to have held a title. This was largely because champion Floyd Patterson's management had steered clear of him during Foley's prime. At long last, in March 1967, Zora Foley earned a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship, though the opportunity came at a time when Foley was already past his peak. Foley's title shot came against none other than Muhammad Ali, and it would become the defining fight of his career. And by the way, you can watch this full fight on YouTube if you're a boxing fan. The bout took place on March 22, 1967, at New York's Madison Square Garden. By then, Ali was at the height of his power, undefeated and flamboyant, while Foley was 36 years old and considered an aging challenger. In the lead-up to the fight, Ali was unusually restrained in his typical trash talk, finding little to criticize in the polite contender. That said, he couldn't help issuing some backhanded compliments, calling Foley a nice, sweet old family man. Notably, Foley was one of the first opponents to address the champion by his chosen Muslim name, rather than Cassius Clay, a sign of respect that Ali acknowledged. Some have speculated that this was the reason Ali's usually brash trash talk was so toned down for this fight. When the bell rang, Foley's experience and skill were on display. He started strong and gave the champ a competitive fight in the early rounds. Ultimately, however, Ali's speed and prime conditioning proved too much. In the 7th round, Ali caught Foley with a quick combination, knocking him out and retaining the title. After the bout, Ali remarked that, quote, "Things might have been different had we met 10 years ago," implying that Foley in his prime could have posed a serious threat. This fight, Foley's lone title challenge, was historically significant for another reason. It turned out to be Ali's last match before his 3-year exile from boxing, due to his draft refusal case. Foley retired from boxing in 1970, following a knockout loss to rising contender Mac Foster. He was 39 and ready to move on to the next phase of life. Foley had always prioritized his family. He and his wife, Joella, were raising 8 children, and he seamlessly transitioned into civilian life. He took a job as a car salesman and remained a beloved figure in Chandler. In 1970, the city appointed Foley to fill a vacancy on the Chandler City Council, capitalizing on his local fame and sterling reputation. In early July 1972, Foley traveled south from Chandler to the city of Tucson, Arizona, for reasons that remain unclear. On the evening of July 7, 1972, he checked into the Sands Motel in Tucson, reportedly under an assumed name, accompanied by an old acquaintance named Artis Broom. Also with them were Broom's wife Dorothy and another woman from Mesa, Arizona, named Ann Young. Broom was known by Foley's friends as a dubious hanger-on, a small-time celebrity friend whose close involvement with Foley had always been puzzling. Nonetheless, Foley apparently trusted him enough to pay a late-night visit. Sometime around midnight, an incident occurred at the motel's swimming pool that would prove fatal. According to the official police account, Foley and Artis Broom began engaging in playful roughhousing near the pool. What happened next is the subject of controversy more than a half-century later. According to one person, this rough horseplay led to Foley losing his balance, or perhaps being pushed, and falling into the pool, where he struck his head. Foley was pulled from the water gravely injured. One of the panicked women ran to the motel office and urgently summoned an ambulance. Paramedics rushed Foley to a nearby hospital, but it was too late. In the early hours of July 8, 1972, 41-year-old Zora Foley was pronounced dead from his injuries. The initial tragedy of a respected athlete dying in an apparent freak accident was compounded by the disturbing condition of Foley's body. His injuries didn't look like the result of a simple slip and fall. A motel employee who saw Foley after the incident described multiple wounds. He described large bumps on his forehead, a gaping wound, described as a hole, on the top of his head, and another significant injury to the back of his skull. This was, as observers noted, pretty extensive damage for someone who ostensibly just hit his head falling into a swimming pool. One blow might be expected from an accidental fall, but 3 distinct head injuries in different spots raised immediate suspicions of foul play. The Tucson police, however, found no overt evidence of a crime at the scene, and quickly ruled Foley's death an accident. The case was essentially closed as an unfortunate mishap. No one was charged, and the other individuals present were not detained. Notably, the official paperwork surrounding the incident, most police reports, witness statements, and the medical examiner's findings were not released to the public. In fact, years later, researchers discovered that the records had effectively vanished. This lack of documentation has made it impossible to re-examine the case, locking the true details of Foley's death behind a wall of time and bureaucratic silence. With so many troubling details and so few official answers, it's no surprise that conspiracy theories have swirled around Zora Foley's death for decades. From the beginning, many observers found the accident narrative hard to accept. One theory suggests that he was lured to the motel under false pretenses and slain for reasons unknown. The most common reason given, which is purely speculative, is that there may have been a dispute over money. Some have speculated that Zora Foley, who was known to be a generous and good-hearted person, may have lent money to someone who simply didn't feel like repaying him. Another persistent rumor is that Foley's death was a mob-related attack. Organized crime had long tentacles in boxing during the mid-20th century, and some wonder if Foley had crossed the wrong people. This theory gained a sliver of traction when Jet magazine reported that 2 suspicious-looking men were seen loitering around the motel on the night Foley died. Foley wasn't in debt, and no clear motive for an organized crime involvement has ever been identified, making this theory more speculative than substantiated. Some observers have raised the possibility that Foley's race and the era's social climate played a role in the aftermath. They speculate that the Tucson police simply didn't want to conduct a meaningful investigation and simply closed their file out as soon as possible. Through all the speculation, Foley's immediate family remained relatively quiet. His widow, Joella Foley, has never spoken publicly about the incident and did not push for any further inquiries. Whether she accepted the official version or simply chose to avoid reliving the trauma is unknown. In 1999, at the absolute peak of a professional athlete's career, one of the NBA's rising stars did the unthinkable. At just 30 years old, Bison DeLay, the highest paid player on the Detroit Pistons, abruptly retired. He walked away from the remaining 5 years and $36.45 million on his contract. To the sports world, it was an act of inexplicable madness. To DeLay, it was the only logical thing to do. DeLay was a 6'10", 260-pound center who had won a championship with Michael Jordan's 1997 Chicago Bulls. Yet he was also a sensitive intellectual who arrived at team practices on a skateboard. He was a bookworm who devoured texts on art and philosophy. He was a lover of Nietzsche, and an accomplished musician proficient in the saxophone, trumpet, and violin. He was an adventurer who ran with the Bulls in Pamplona, held a pilot's license, and loved to skydive. He was also a man of deep complexity, having recovered from depression and an attempt to end it all in 1992. Early retirement, according to Bison, would allow him to just focus on living. In the end, this led him to a 55-foot catamaran in the South Pacific, where his new life and the lives of 2 others would be stolen. DeLay's ultimate dream was freedom on the open water. After traveling the world, he learned to sail and purchased a large catamaran, which he docked for a time in New Zealand at Auckland's West Haven Marina. He named the vessel the Hakuna Matata, a famous Swahili phrase for no worries that was popularized by 2 singing animals in a Disney movie. It was a floating, 55-foot declaration of his new philosophy. He was embarking on the beginning of a new story, and he wasn't alone. He was joined by his 30-year-old girlfriend, Serena Carlin. Born in New York and raised in Berkeley, she was described as the quintessential flower child. She was creative, shy, and adventurous in her own right, having befriended Prince and managed his charities before trying her hand as a makeup artist and a New York real estate agent. After the September 11th attacks left her depressed and wanting to leave the city, DeLay invited her to join him. The third person on the voyage was Bertrand Saldo, 32. Saldo wasn't a guest, but a professional. A French skipper DeLay had hired to captain the large catamaran on its long journey. Together, the 3 of them had formed a small, idyllic community on the Hakuna Matata, living the life DeLay had purchased by leaving behind his basketball career. This idyllic scene wasn't built to last. A 4th person joined the boat, DeLay's older brother, Miles DeBoard, 35. DeBoard, born Kevin Williams, was a computer programmer from California and the dark variable in DeLay's new life. The brothers' relationship was notoriously volatile, described by friends and family as frequently at odds. The jealousy and conflict weren't a secret. A previous crew member on the Hakuna Matata had actually quit, unable to stand the constant fighting between the 2 brothers. His presence on the final trip was a source of immediate and palpable tension. He had turned up uninvited in New Zealand earlier in the year, starting arguments before leaving. When he returned to join the boat for the trip to Tahiti, Serena Carlin made her discomfort known. DeLay, the younger brother, was a famous, wealthy, and successful athlete. DeBoard wasn't any of these things. He had financial difficulties and a strong jealous streak, despite his brother giving him more than 6 figures in cash over the years, in gifts and quote-unquote loans. These loans were of course a fiction to preserve Miles DeBoard's ego, and he had no intention of ever repaying them. On July 6, 2002, the Hakuna Matata sailed from Tahiti, On board were the four individuals: Bison DeLay, Serena Carlin, Bertrand Saldo, and Miles DeBoard. The boat was scheduled to sail to Honolulu. The last known communications from anyone on the vessel were a series of satellite phone calls made on July 8th. After that, the boat, and the three people DeLay's family and friends knew to be on it, went silent. The silence was the first piece of evidence. DeLay and Carlin were in regular contact with their families and their banks. While Carlin had warned her friends she might be out of touch for up to a month due to the remote location, her friends and family became worried. The first concrete sign of what had happened came nearly 2 weeks after the last call. On July 18, 2002, Miles DeBoard was seen docking the 55-foot catamaran at a port in Taravao, Tahiti. Disturbingly, he was alone. The investigative trail DeBoard left was clumsy, arrogant, and damning. When French authorities and the FBI located the catamaran, they found its nameplate had been ripped off. DeBoard had attempted to re-register the vessel under a new name, the Aria Bella. Witnesses reported seeing DeBoard, alone on the renamed boat, throwing large sacks from the deck into a garbage can. Authorities later recovered clothing and diving suits from the bags. A forensic team, decked out head to toe in protective suits, boarded the vessel. Their search confirmed the family's worst fears. They discovered what they believed were bloodstains. Even more chilling, they found what appeared to be bullet holes that had been crudely patched and painted over. They also found residue from a large caliber weapon. DeBoard, meanwhile, had fled French Polynesia. On September 5th, 2002, he surfaced in Phoenix, Arizona, in the most brazen way imaginable. He was attempting to buy $150,000 in gold coins from a bullion dealer. To make the purchase, he was actively impersonating his missing brother. He presented DeLay's passport as his own identification and signed receipts using DeLay's birth name, Brian Williams. Police were alerted and detained DeBoard on suspicion of fraud. Inexplicably, after a few hours, they released him. They couldn't, at that moment, disprove DeBoard's claim that his brother had authorized the transaction, since his brother was only missing. It was the last time he would be seen by law enforcement. DeBoard collected the passport and vanished, fleeing to Mexico. With DeBoard on the run, his ex-girlfriend Erica Weiss went to the FBI. She recounted the story DeBoard had told her, providing the world with the first of two competing theories about what happened on the Hakuna Matata. The first theory is DeBoard's own elaborate self-defense confession. As Weiss told the Los Angeles Times, DeBoard claimed a fight broke out between him and DeLay. Serena Carlin tried to intervene and was accidentally knocked down, hitting her head on a part of the boat and dying instantly. This led to a cascade of violence. In his main version of the story, the captain, Bertrand Saldo, wanted to report Carlin's death, which Miles DeBoard claimed sent DeLay into a panic. DeBoard alleged that DeLay then slew Saldo to silence him. This led to a final life-or-death struggle between the brothers, which ended when DeBoard shot DeLay in self-defense. He then admitted to taking the three bodies and dumping them overboard into the Pacific. If his story was to be believed, it was a disturbing tragedy of errors and crimes, with DeBoard as the sole traumatized survivor. This theory, of course, leaves a lot to be desired, since it portrayed DeBoard as likely legally innocent. If he was responsible for Carlin's death, it was an accident when she tried to break them up. If he shot his brother, it was because he was going to eliminate him to cover up the slaying of the skipper. The second theory, the one held by the authorities, is one of a cold, premeditated triple slaying. Investigators believed the motive was simple: financial gain. The FBI's case was built on evidence that directly contradicted DeBoard's story. First, there was the gold buying scheme, which showed intent to steal DeLay's assets. However, this could potentially be dismissed as an unethical and illegal action taken after the fact. The next part couldn't. Second, and most damning, the FBI found Dabord had purchased approximately $200 of dumbbell weights from a Rebel sports store in Auckland, New Zealand, before the final voyage. The FBI suspected these weren't for exercise. They were purchased with the specific intent to weigh down the bodies. This single purchase suggested premeditation, shattering the self-defense narrative. Further evidence came from satellite phone records. On July 8th, likely right after the attacks, Dabord placed a call to a mystery woman in New Zealand he had befriended. The authorities were able to get the records of the call, but disturbingly, he didn't mention anything whatsoever about what had happened. The manhunt for Miles Dabord, the only person in the world who knew the truth, ended on September 14th, 2002. He was found unconscious in Tijuana, Mexico, and transported to a hospital in Chula Vista, California. He was admitted as a John Doe, unidentified and in a deep coma. The cause was a massive, intentional overdose of insulin, which, combined with his failure to take his asthma medication, had caused catastrophic and irreversible brain damage. Before his overdose, Dabord had placed a final crying phone call to his mother. He offered a last, cryptic version of events, telling her that he found out the truth about something, but that no one would believe him. He told her that he couldn't survive in prison, but that he was completely innocent. On September 27th, 2002, Miles Dabord died, less than 3 months after his brother had vanished. He was the only person who could have told investigators what truly happened on the Hakuna Matata, and he took that secret to his grave. With the death of the sole suspect and witness, the active investigation into the triple slaying effectively ended. The bodies of Bison DeLay, Serena Carlin, and Bertrand Saldo have never been recovered. The case remains a profound, chilling, and technically unresolvable mystery. We're left with only the conflicting stories of a dead man and the cold, hard evidence of a crime. Patched bullet holes, blood stains on a renamed boat, and a set of dumbbell weights purchased in Auckland. The rest of the truth, like the victims themselves, was lost at sea. In a final tragic testament to the case's impossible, tangled grief, a memorial service was eventually held for both brothers by the family. On the crisp autumn afternoon of October 1st, 1919, America turned its gaze to Cincinnati's Redland Field. The World Series was set to begin, pitting the powerhouse Chicago White Sox, a team some considered among the greatest ever assembled, against the underdog Cincinnati Reds. The White Sox were such overwhelming favorites that finding anyone willing to bet against them was a fool's errand. On the mound for Chicago stood Eddie Cicotte, the team's ace, a brilliant pitcher coming off a spectacular season. His first pitch of the series was a clean strike. The crowd roared. Everything felt right. His second pitch, however, was different. It sailed inside and struck Reds leadoff hitter Maury Rath squarely in the back. To the tens of thousands watching, it was just an erratic pitch, a shaky start for the veteran. But for a handful of men scattered across the country, the gamblers who had quietly placed $10,000 in cash under Cicotte's hotel room pillow, it was the unmistakable signal. The fix was on. In that single, deliberate act of contrived incompetence, the sacred trust between player and fan was broken. It was the moment a simple game of baseball became something much darker, a conspiracy, a swindle, and what would forever be known as baseball's original sin. To understand how a team so dominant could agree to sell its soul, one must first understand the world they inhabited. The popular narrative, immortalized in books and films, paints a simple picture of victimhood. It casts White Sox owner Charles Comiskey as a notorious miser whose penny-pinching ways drove his underpaid superstars to desperation. Recent historical analysis of salary data from the era reveals a far more complex reality. The 1919 Chicago White Sox weren't a band of beleaguered paupers working for pennies. They had the third highest team payroll in the American League, and when accounting for bonuses, likely the highest in all of baseball. Their payroll was substantially larger than that of their World Series opponents. The stars were earning salaries many times that of the average American worker in a time when there were few opportunities to be a professional sportsman. The real source of player resentment wasn't their paychecks, but their powerlessness. Baseball's draconian reserve clause effectively bound a player to one team for their entire career, stripping them of any bargaining power. For example, Ty Cobb couldn't sign with another club unless Detroit traded or released him. He simply had zero agency in the matter. Simply put, baseball players were highly paid assets, but assets nonetheless, unable to test their value on an open market. This systemic lack of agency fostered a deep-seated cynicism toward owners like Comiskey, who became symbols of this absolute control. This frustration simmered in a culture where the lines between baseball and betting were almost non-existent. Fans openly placed bets in the grandstands on everything from the final score to what the result of the next pitch would be. Players themselves frequently bet on games, and their casual association with gamblers blurred ethical boundaries, and the earliest match-fixing scandals went back decades. Contrary to the myth of predatory gamblers luring innocent players into a trap, the plot to throw the 1919 World Series was born from within the White Sox clubhouse. The consensus among historians is that the players themselves were the instigators. The undisputed ringleader was first baseman Chick Gandil, a tough, hard-nosed player with deep connections to the gambling underworld. Alongside ace pitcher Eddie Saccott, who was reportedly worried about his financial future and his aging arm, Gandil hatched the scheme. He approached his underworld contacts with a stunning proposal. The World Series was for sale. Gandil and Saccott became the architects, recruiting teammates from their faction within the divided locker room. They brought in key players like pitcher Lefty Williams and shortstop Charles Risberg. Oscar Felsch and third baseman Buck Weaver were present at the meetings, though Weaver would insist he wanted no part of the final deal. Others would find other ways to enter into the conspiracy. For instance, utility infielder Fred McMullen wasn't even invited. In a move out of Crusader Kings, he forced his way into the plot after overhearing the conspirators and threatening to expose them if he wasn't given a cut. The involvement of the team's biggest star is one of the biggest mysteries surrounding this scandal. The extent of Shoeless Joe Jackson's part in the plot remains the most hotly debated piece of the puzzle to this day. He admitted to taking money to fix the game, but then double-crossed the gamblers and went out and tried his best. His performance during the World Series was absolutely stellar, leading many modern scholars to believe he was running a grift on the scammers. Basically, he put on a world-class game of baseball over the course of 8 games, despite accepting a fat stack of bills to be in on the fix. The conspiracy was messy from the start, involving at least 2 separate and competing syndicates of gamblers. Gandil's primary contact was Boston bookie Joseph Sullivan. Simultaneously, a former ballplayer named Bill Burns and his partner Billy Maharg were organizing their own financing. Both groups quickly realized they needed a massive bankroll to pay the players their promised $100,000 fee. That led them all to one man, Arnold Rothstein, the most powerful and notorious underworld financier in New York. Rothstein was a criminal mastermind, the inspiration for fictional characters like Meyer Wolfsheim in The Great Gatsby. He initially turned down the offer but was eventually persuaded, likely seeing an opportunity for a foolproof score. Rothstein, however, was far too clever to deal with the players directly. He operated through layers of insulation, using associates as intermediaries. This calculated distance ensured that while he would profit immensely from the fix, his name would never be directly tied to the dirty work. When the scheme eventually imploded, this structure allowed Rothstein to walk away untouched, while the players took the fall. The exact level of involvement of this underworld kingpin remains a matter of debate, given how adept he was at covering his tracks, and how tightly his lips were sealed. Notably, less than a decade later, while Arnold Rothstein was laying on his deathbed after being attacked, he famously told the cops his dad shot him. For clarity's sake, for those unfamiliar with the story, his dad definitely didn't do it. The fix began to unravel almost as soon as it started. After Eddie Saccott's signal in Game 1, he proceeded to pitch abysmally. In Game 2, Lefty Williams took the mound and issued a series of suspicious walks in the fourth inning, leading to a 4-2 Reds victory. The players had delivered 2 losses as promised, but when it came time to collect, the gamblers reneged. Of the $40,000 they were owed, they received only a single payment of $10,000, which Gandil split among the conspirators. The trust between the cheaters was immediately broken. The plan descended into chaos. In Game 3, in a surprise move, a rookie pitcher who wasn't in on the fix took the mound for Chicago, leading to a White Sox victory. The gamblers were furious, and the players were divided. The fix was back on for Games 4 and 5 with more suspicious plays, and the Reds won both games, taking a commanding 4-1 lead in the best-of-9 series. By this point, the players were enraged. They had been repeatedly shorted on their payments and felt they were being double-crossed. In a stunning turn, they decided to double-cross the gamblers back. Playing with renewed fire, and also playing with fire, the White Sox won Games 6 and 7, suddenly pulling the series to a tense 4-3. The gamblers, who had millions riding on a Cincinnati victory, were panicked. Before the pivotal Game 8, they reasserted their control. According to some theories, the mob sent out some heavies not to threaten the ball players, but their wives. Whatever the truth of what happened, the Reds crushed the White Sox in Game 8, and the Cincinnati Reds won their tainted championship. For nearly a year, the scandal remained an open secret, a swirl of rumors that dogged the White Sox throughout the 1920 season. Sports writers refused to let the story go, relentlessly questioning the legitimacy of the 1919 series due to the highly irregular performances of the White Sox players. Their persistence finally forced the hand of the authorities, and in September 1920, a Cook County grand jury was convened to investigate gambling in baseball. The conspiracy quickly unraveled with a number of the men turning on each other. Thankfully, this occurred in Chicago in the early part of the 20th century, so there would be no corruption whatsoever to follow. The subsequent trial in the summer of 1921 was, by all accounts, as conventional as the 1919 World Series itself. The prosecution's most crucial evidence, the signed confessions of 3 of the players, had mysteriously vanished from the courthouse files. Years later, they would reportedly reappear in the possession of Comiskey's personal lawyer. What a strange coincidence, right? Truly baffling. Without the confessions, and with key witnesses recanting, the state's case fell apart. The jury, seemingly enamored with the celebrity athletes before them, took less than 3 hours to acquit all defendants on all charges on August 2nd, 1921. The players were carried from the courtroom on the shoulders of jubilant fans. Their celebration lasted less than 24 hours. The verdict had terrified baseball's owners, who saw the public's faith in their product evaporating. To save the game, they had already made a radical move, hiring federal judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis as baseball's first ever commissioner and granting him absolute power. The day after the acquittal, Landis issued a statement that would change American sports forever. He declared that the jury's verdict was irrelevant, and he invoked his absolute authority to protect the integrity of the game. The 8 men involved in the Black Sox scandal were banned for life, though in a bizarre turn of events, in 2025 the decision was reversed. Shoeless Joe Jackson, who would be almost 150 years old now, is once again eligible to play ball. Sweet Jimmy Robinson was a journeyman boxer on the fringes of the 1960s boxing scene. Born around 1925 in Kansas City, Missouri, he eventually settled in Miami, Florida. There, Robinson became known as a reliable last-minute substitute in local prize fights, essentially a professional opponent used to test up-and-coming prospects. For those familiar with professional wrestling, he essentially functioned as a jobber who went out there under the understanding that he was almost certainly going to get dumpstered. His modest record and humble role set the stage for an encounter with a young Cassius Clay that would make Robinson a historical curiosity. Robinson turned professional in 1960, winning his debut but losing his next 2 fights. His most notable opportunity came the following year, in an extremely unlikely showdown with the future Muhammad Ali. Robinson's brief brush with boxing history came on February 7, 1961, in Miami Beach. That night, a young Cassius Clay was scheduled to fight Willie Gullett. When Willie ducked out at the last minute over a pay dispute, the promoter enlisted Sweet Jimmy as a last-minute replacement. Robinson arrived with his gear in an old army bag, stepping in despite giving up over 15 pounds to the Olympic gold medalist. Clay dominated the bout and knocked Robinson out just 94 seconds into the first round. It was Clay's 4th professional fight and his first victory by first-round knockout. For Robinson, that lopsided defeat became his singular claim to fame. He became a footnote in Ali's rise to the pantheon of the greatest athletes of all time. After the Clay fight, Robinson fought on as a journeyman for a few more years, but wins remained scarce. He retired from pro boxing in 1964 with a record of 8 victories against 24 losses. In 1968, well past his prime, he returned for one last pro bout against Kent Green, who had previously bested Muhammad Ali in the amateur circuit. That final defeat brought his boxing career to an end permanently, adding one more loss to his tally. Outside the ring, Sweet Jimmy spent his days at a local Miami pool hall, often reminding anyone who'd listen that he once shared a pro boxing ring with Muhammad Ali. Based on what we know of him, life after boxing was difficult for Sweet Jimmy. Robinson lived on meager veterans' benefits and reportedly served time in prison following a robbery conviction. By the late 1970s, he was scraping by through odd jobs, gambling, and drinking, a faded local character known more for his stories than for any success. In 1979, Sports Illustrated photographer Michael Brennan managed to track Robinson down in Miami for what became the ex-fighter's last known interview. The assignment was part of a Sports Illustrated feature on Ali's early opponents, and most of what we know about Robinson's later years comes from that short profile. The man Brennan found was a shadow of the former boxer. Photographs from that meeting showed Robinson gaunt and weathered, missing teeth, a scar along his cheek, and a tired gaze. He was living on the margins of society and is believed to have been functionally homeless at the time of the interview. Speaking to Brennan, Robinson reminisced about his ring days, especially his famous loss to Clay. He insisted he had weighed only 158 pounds, not the officially listed 178, for that fight, and he spoke fondly of Ali. Robinson claimed that Muhammad Ali, whom he still called Cassius Clay, had been a friend who had reached out to give him money now and then and make sure he had the basics. After that encounter in 1979, Sweet Jimmy Robinson vanished from the public record. Robinson's whereabouts after 1979 remain a mystery. Muhammad Ali fought 50 professional opponents in his career, and Robinson is the only one whose fate is entirely unknown. Over the years, many have tried in vain to find him. A sports writer, Wright Thompson, spent over half a decade chasing leads, only to come up empty-handed by 2009. No death certificate, hospital entry, or any records related to his veterans' benefits has ever surfaced to shed light on Robinson's fate. In the absence of evidence, several theories about Robinson's fate have circulated. The most common assumption is that he likely died anonymously on the streets, his death going unreported or unnoticed in the 80s or 90s. Online sleuths have speculated that he may be one of the numerous John Does associated with that city, though no evidence directly supports this. Others speculate he may have left Miami to start over elsewhere, perhaps under a different name, but no corroborating records have been found. Others believe that he may have returned to his place of birth in Kansas City, Missouri, where he was speculated to still have family. Unfortunately, leads on this have been incredibly difficult to find, given that Robinson is an extremely common name, especially among Black Americans. To put this difficulty in context, according to the 2010 U.S. Census data, there were 250,000 Black Americans with the name Robinson. If Robinson were alive today, he'd be nearly 100 years old, an unlikely prospect given the complete absence of any sign of him, as well as his hard-living lifestyle. Decades later, boxing fans still wonder what became of Robinson. His saga shines a light on the sport's less glamorous side, a reminder of the human struggles behind boxing's glory. For every Muhammad Ali or Sugar Ray Robinson who achieves everlasting glory, there are thousands of fighters who fade into obscurity, sometimes vanishing without a trace. Sonny Liston was once the most feared boxer on the planet. He was a towering heavyweight champion whose fists struck terror into opponents and whose personal story captivated the public. In the early 1960s, Liston dominated the boxing world, famously knocking out Floyd Patterson twice in the first round to become world champion. He later lost his title in 2 legendary bouts against a brash young challenger, then known as Cassius Clay, fights marred by controversy and whispers of a fix. Outside the ring, Liston's life was a tumultuous journey from poverty and prison to fame, and ultimately to an early and mysterious death. In December 1970, Sonny Liston would die under strange and disturbing circumstances, which are hotly debated till this day. Sonny Liston's path to the heavyweight championship was as unlikely as it was rough. He was born into extreme poverty in rural Arkansas as one of over 20 children, and he endured a brutal upbringing. Notably, the year of his birth was never recorded, though it's believed that he was born in either 1930 or 1932. As a teenager in St. Louis, Liston fell into crime, which landed him in Missouri State Penitentiary by age 20. In prison, he discovered boxing under the guidance of a Catholic priest who ran the prison gym. Sounds like the plot of a movie to me, honestly, but that's the truth of the matter. Liston learned to channel his immense physical strength into the sport, becoming the prison champion and earning an early parole in 1952 to pursue a boxing career. Upon release, however, Liston found that professional boxing in the 1950s was deeply entwined with organized crime. He was effectively taken under the wing of mob-connected handlers who controlled lucrative boxing matches. Turning down their offer was not an option for a young fighter with Liston's past. Thus, from the start of his career, Liston was tied to underworld backers who helped propel him up the ranks. This connection would follow him his entire career and would perhaps be the reason that he would end up in an early grave. Liston made his pro debut in 1953 and rapidly built a reputation as a devastating puncher. By the late 1950s, he was dismantling one contender after another, using his ominously long reach and sledgehammer fists to knock out most opponents. His massive paw swings eventually earned him the nickname the Big Bear, a name I personally approve of. Between 1958 and 1963, Liston was virtually unbeatable. He defeated top heavyweights like Cleveland Williams, Zora Fowley, and Eddie Macon, often in brutal fashion. This string of victories made Liston the #1 challenger for the heavyweight crown. Yet his shot at the title was delayed, in part because of his criminal reputation and mob ties. Boxing's authorities and even political leaders were uneasy about Liston fighting for one of the most coveted titles in sports. Famously, President John F. Kennedy privately urged reigning champion Floyd Patterson not to give Liston a title shot, given Liston's well-known underworld ties. Ultimately, Patterson, despite this presidential plea, agreed to face Liston. In September 1962, Sonny Liston finally got his title shot against Floyd Patterson in Chicago. Liston was a heavy favorite, and he confirmed those odds by demolishing Patterson with a first-round knockout to become the heavyweight champion of the world. It was the first time the heavyweight championship had ever changed hands in the opening round. A year later, Liston and Patterson had a rematch, and once again, Liston crushed Patterson in the first round. These back-to-back triumphs cemented Liston's status as the most dominant fighter alive. At 6 feet tall and roughly 215 pounds with an 84-inch reach, he was a formidable physical presence. Sports historians later compared his aura of invincibility to what Mike Tyson would cultivate a generation later. Liston's dominance in the ring stood in stark contrast to his standing in the eyes of the public. To many Americans in the early 1960s, Liston was the embodiment of a bad man. He was an ex-convict with suspected mob connections and a sullen, intimidating demeanor. In an era when the civil rights movement was demanding dignity and respect for Black Americans, Liston's image was divisive. He was often cast as the villain not only of boxing, but as a symbol in a larger morality play. Within the Black community, Liston drew criticism from leaders who felt he was a poor role model, especially compared with gentlemanly boxers like Zora Fowley. Inside the ropes, however, Liston soon met a challenger who would redefine boxing and culture, Cassius Clay. Their February 1964 heavyweight title bout in Miami was fraught with drama. Clay was young, fast-talking, and brash, a self-promoting 22-year-old who dubbed Liston a big ugly bear, turning his positive nickname into an insult. Few gave Clay a chance, with Liston being the 8-1 betting favorite. But in a stunning upset, Sonny Liston failed to come out for the 7th round, surrendering his title to the exuberant Clay. Liston cited a shoulder injury as the reason he quit on his stool, but the unexpected result ignited immediate speculation. How could the unbeatable champion be dethroned by a loudmouth young upstart? Naturally, many questioned whether the match was fixed. Some theorized that Liston held back against Clay and then gave up at the behest of his mob sponsors. The following year, a rematch took place in Lewiston, Maine, under even stranger circumstances. So yeah, here's the time for the big reveal, if you didn't already know. By now, Cassius Clay had taken the name Muhammad Ali. In the first round, Ali caught Liston with a quick right hand as Liston lunged forward. The punch that became known as the Phantom Punch, because so few saw it land clearly. Liston collapsed to the canvas and chaos ensued. Many at ringside didn't believe the punch was hard enough to knock him down, sparking accusations that Liston took a dive on purpose. The refereeing was confused, and the fight was over almost as soon as it began, with Ali declared the winner. To this day, Liston's loss in this rematch remains one of boxing's most debated moments, and one of the most debated moments in the history of sport. Importantly, this is the fight that gave us one of the most iconic photographs, not only in sporting history, but in world history. Ali is seen screaming at Sonny Liston, telling him to get up, with Muhammad Ali clearly believing that his opponent took a dive. The FBI and Justice Department investigated allegations of a fix, but they found no hard evidence to support those claims. Regardless, the two defeats shattered Liston's aura of invincibility. Once the meanest man in the world, he suddenly seemed vulnerable, and his reputation suffered. By the mid-1960s, Sonny Liston was no longer champion, and in the eyes of many, he was also a fallen idol of sorts, if he ever was an idol, hounded by suspicions. Yet he was still too proud and too skilled to fade away quietly. Liston spent the late 1960s trying to fight his way back into contention. He relocated to Las Vegas, won a string of matches against lesser-known heavyweights, and even served as a sparring partner to rising stars like a young George Foreman. However, his hopes of regaining the title were dashed in December 1969, when he was dumpstered by Lee Otis Martin, a bitter defeat that effectively ended his run as an elite fighter. Liston did step into the ring one last time in June 1970, defeating Chuck Wepner, the man who would inspire Sylvester Stallone to write the first Rocky film. He retired with an official professional record of 50 wins and 4 losses, including 39 knockouts. Even as his boxing career was winding down, Liston's personal life in Las Vegas had become a tightrope walk between two worlds. By day, he could play the celebrity, doing handshake appearances at casinos and posing for photographs with fans who liked his menacing persona. By night, however, Liston moved in Las Vegas's shadowy underside, where his notoriety afforded him protection and work of a shadier kind. He became an enforcer and debt collector for dealers and loan sharks, leveraging his fearsome reputation to intimidate those who owed money. There were reports that he cruised the Vegas streets in a pink Cadillac, making drops and pickups for criminal associates. By 1970, Liston was entangled in the very criminal underworld that had shadowed him since his youth. Federal narcotics agents had also taken an interest in Liston. In early 1969, he was present at a raid, yet mysteriously, he was the only one who was not arrested when federal agents swept in. This odd incident led some underworld figures to suspect Liston had cut a deal and become an informant. Liston vehemently denied being a snitch, but the seed of doubt was planted among his dangerous associates. According to some, this seed would rapidly grow into an olive tree, whose branches would be pecked apart by woodpeckers of mistrust. Not long after, Liston had a violent falling out with a mob boss, and even slapped the man's teenage son during an argument over money in 1970. In short, by the end of 1970, Sonny Liston was navigating a very precarious existence, and a lot of people likely wanted him knocked off. He was financially strained, mixed up in mob debts and illicit dealings, likely under police scrutiny, and no longer insulated by the glory of the spotlight. Just after the new year rang in, Sonny Liston's troubled journey came to a sudden, grim end. On January 5, 1971, Liston's wife Geraldine returned home from an extended holiday trip and found Sonny lying lifeless in their Las Vegas house. His body was slumped against their bed, badly decomposed, indicating he had been dead for about a week. The timing suggests Liston likely died in late December 1970, with the official date later fixed as December 30th, 1970. Geraldine's horrifying discovery set off an investigation, but it was one riddled with peculiarities from the start. The police noted no immediate signs of foul play or struggle at the scene, and were quick to pronounce that Liston's death didn't look suspicious. Inside the home, however, they found some troubling evidence. A small amount of pot was discovered in Liston's clothing, and more ominously, about a quarter ounce of heroin was found in a balloon in the kitchen. On the dresser in his bedroom lay a loaded weapon, which was, perhaps, a testament to the dangers Liston felt lurking in his life. The coroner's examination later revealed apparent needle punctures on Liston's arm. Toxicology results were inconclusive due to the state of the body, but there were traces of morphine, a product of heroin metabolism, in his system, pointing to a possible heroin overdose. In the end, the Clark County coroner announced that Liston's likely cause of death was heart failure brought on by substance use. Vegas police ultimately closed the case, calling it an accidental OD with no signs of foul play. Sonny Liston was quickly laid to rest in a quiet gravesite, leaving friends and fans stunned and dissatisfied with the murky conclusion. Right from the outset, many who knew Liston refused to accept the official story. Sonny Liston was known to be extremely afraid of needles, and as such it seemed odd that such a man would choose to inject himself in this way. Over the years, the lack of clear answers has been filled by a trio of leading theories, each with its own tangle of facts and conjecture. The simplest explanation, and the official one, is that Sonny Liston died of a heroin overdose, whether accidental or intentional. Proponents of this theory point to the physical evidence at the scene. The substances found in his home and the needle marks on his arm tell the story, according to them. They suggest that Liston, who was known to be living a fast and reckless life at the time, may have experimented with injecting heroin and misjudged a dose, leading to a fatal overdose. It's true that by late 1970, Liston's lifestyle included plenty of risky behavior. He frequented after-hours clubs and was reportedly dealing in substances himself. It's conceivable that he sampled his own wares, or that, after years of physical pain from boxing, he turned to heroin for relief or escape. Another version of this theory is that the overdose might have been intentional. However, most who knew Liston found this to be unlikely since he was talking about the potential to get back in the ring one last time. Still, the overdose theory has significant holes. As mentioned, Liston's apparent aversion to needles casts doubt on the idea of him voluntarily shooting up. Notably, his friends who observed him in his final days indicated that while he was drinking heavily, he didn't show any of the telltale signs of heroin usage. Still, regardless, this remains the official story till this day. By far the most popular theory, and one that fits the backdrop of Liston's Vegas life, is that Sonny Liston was slain by mob associates or criminal enemies. One oft-cited clue is what happened 6 months before his death, after his final fight. In June 1970, Liston fought Chuck Wepner in New Jersey and won decisively. Before that bout, a couple of shady characters approached Liston and hinted that he might consider losing, since Wepner was a local favorite. Liston ignored the suggestion and beat Wepner to a pulp. It's been speculated that by refusing to throw the fight, Liston angered some underworld figures who had bet money on Wepner. If true, that could be a motive for retaliation, and essentially, Liston may have signed his own death warrant by not taking a dive. Another potential motive involves Liston's knowledge of criminal dealings. Having been so close to mobsters for years, Liston undoubtedly knew of fixed fights and illicit schemes. Some suspect that certain powerful figures worried Liston might talk to authorities given the 1969 bust, after which he was thought to have been flipped. Under this theory, which has never been proven, the mob hired a corrupt cop to give Liston a lethal hotshot of smack, ending him right there. Others point a finger at the dealers Liston worked with. Liston's violent altercation where he smacked a mobster's son over a monetary dispute could have created significant bad blood. Yet despite all these suspicions, hard evidence for foul play is scant. Police at the time found no signs of forced entry or struggle in Liston's home, and no one reported hearing a disturbance. The third theory intersects with the second, suggesting that law enforcement, either directly or indirectly, had a hand in Liston's death, or at least knew more than they revealed. This line of speculation often centers on the idea that Liston may have been an informant for federal narcotics agents. According to this theory, Liston was working with corrupt Vegas cops who facilitated his criminal behavior. Some suspect these federal agents were using Liston to build a wider case against rogue elements of the Las Vegas PD. This theory explains why the police department was so eager to shut the case down and accept that it was an overdose. More than half a century has passed since Sonny Liston's death, and we're still left with more questions than answers. In that time, Sonny's legend has only grown, and his reputation has managed to improve somewhat. He's now generally remembered as one of the hardest-hitting and most intimidating champions in heavyweight boxing history.